Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the Masterpiece Society, which is episode 13 of season 5 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. It is also what I am calling part 4 of the Stretch of Boring. It has 4 very boring episodes in a row. In fact, this might be the most boring of the boring. So, Masterpiece Society is the episode where the Enterprise, where the Enterprise comes across a planet where that's about to be destroyed by some cosmic fragment or stellar fragment, or who the fuck cares? It doesn't matter. And they want to save and evacuate the people, but they refuse to leave because they say that they live in a perfectly genetically engineered society where everyone serves a purpose and everyone knows exactly what they're from, and they call it a perfect society. However, they cannot leave because they're integrated with the planet, and so they reluctantly work with the Enterprise crew to find a way to save their colony so they don't have to evacuate. However, in doing so, the lead scientist works with Geordi on the Enterprise, where she becomes enthralled and enchanted by the Enterprise technology and the fact they explore the galaxy. Meanwhile, Troi has an affair with the leader of this colony, which they both regret. However, they managed to work together and save the colony. However, the lead scientist tries to fake another catastrophe and saying they'll have to evacuate, but Geordi catches on to it, finds out that she's lying, and then she and about 20 others ask for asylum on the Enterprise. This puts the head of the colony in a tizzy because 20 people leaving will destroy their fragile masterpiece, and it will take several generations to compensate for the loss of these people because every single person is valid, and Picard works with him to try to find a way to solve this problem. However, Picard refuses to let these people leave, and the people still insist on leaving, so Picard has to grant them asylum. And then Picard muses on how they came there to save the people, but they actually did more damage than any stellar fragment could. So, I've heard a lot of people come up with joking names for episodes that kind of play off the title of the episode, and I usually don't do that, but I thought of one for this episode. I would call this episode the Piece of Shit Society. Instead of the Masterpiece Society, the Piece of Shit Society. Maybe it's what I'll call this episode from now on, and I think that title has a double meaning. First of all, this episode's a piece of shit because it's boring and it's not very good. And secondly, the society depicted in this episode is a piece of shit because this is my main point that I made before, and I'll make it again. If your society cannot withhold 23 people leaving, then your society does not deserve to exist. I'm sorry to be blunt, but that is the crux of it. That all other arguments, and so I really don't have any sympathy for these assholes. I really don't. They should just leave their goddamn society. If they think it's going to fall apart and it's going to be terrible with 23 people leaving, then why don't you leave then? No one's forcing you to stay. But you're trying to force the others to stay, which is wrong. But anywho, and then the whole thing with Picard being like, oh, we did more damage and then he's still a fragment. Hey, asshole. Picard, yes, I just called Picard an asshole. Hey, asshole. They would all be dead if you didn't interfere. So the fact that you took away 23 people from their society and will take them 2 generations, to even compare that with every single person on that colony dying is asinine. It is. Now, I've heard some other people criticize this episode, and they mentioned something that I think is absolutely true, is that perhaps I would be more invested in this episode, or that I would care more about what happens in this episode if they actually depicted and were specific on how exactly the society will be damaged by these 23 people leaving. Because the way it's portrayed in the episode is just a very vague, abstract construct. Like, oh, it's going to take us 2 generations to overcome the deficiencies. So what exactly does that mean? Does that mean people are going to die? That means your technology is going to fall back? Does that mean your medical technology is going to fall back, so more people are going to die of diseases? Does that mean people, or does that just mean people are going to be bored and don't know what to do, or they're going to argue more? Like, what exactly do you mean? Like, they don't make that clear at all, and I think that's part of the reason why I have a hard time giving a shit about these stupid people, about these assholes. And the other thing is, when it said 23 people were leaving, I was thinking, oh wow, that's a lot of people. That's like half the colony, because this goes back to the whole Star Trek. This is a Next Generation fault that has to do with, not having a large enough budget to have, a fair amount of extras, because we only see about 50 or 20 people on the planet. But as always, I think it's implied there's actually thousands of people. So it caught me, it's just a natural instinct. It caught me off guard, like, oh, 23 people, that's a lot. That's almost half the colony. But it's actually probably meant, I don't know if they ever actually state the population of the planet, but I think it's meant to be a drop in the bucket, but yet that drop in the bucket makes a huge deal. I just think this is a very poorly written episode, because Picard does kind of an about face. Because at the start of this episode, he is very rightfully critical of the society, and that's actually more in keeping with Starfleet and the Federation being against any genetic engineering. Now, granted, as I talked about before, this is a trait in the Federation or in Starfleet that will be explored more in future Trek shows. It's not really been established at this stage. It's, in my opinion, it starts in Deep Space Nine with the episode Dr. Bashir, I presume. The one that retconned Bashir to make him genetically engineered. Anyway, but they do Picard he doesn't outright state Khan or the eugenics wars, but I think one can infer that's what he's talking about when he's saying, oh, well, this is, bullshit that that happened on our planet, centuries ago that we've overcome. And so he has a very negative outlook on the society. He's like, oh, he wants to help them and save their lives. He's just pissy about the fact that they're all being all precious about, oh, we can't let people leave. We can't let anyone in. You'll contaminate us. And Picard's like, yeah, no, this whole thing is dumb. But by the end of the episode, he does an about face, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, we did more damage than any stellar fragment, which is, as I mentioned, dumb. And it's just so idiotic. It's such an idiotic thing to say. But not only that, it is completely out of character, and they didn't justify this complete and utter change in Picard's perspective about the society. He should be happy. He should be like, oh, well, he should have the same reaction I do, and saying, well, if the society can't, withhold 23 people leaving, that just shows how much the society is flawed, and it's their own goddamn fault, which is what his reaction should be. So the concept of, oh, this is a genetically, perfect society because everyone knows exactly what they're going to do and they've been engineered from birth to do this and blah, 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 blah. Like, I don't really have anything against that on the face of it. But the fact that they're being all, oh, we can't let you contaminate us, and if people leave, our society will fall apart. Then I'm like, well, fuck your society. Then your society is Darwinism. Your society is not the survival of the fittest, and your society is not the fittest. It was flawed from the start, and if it can't stand a few people leaving, then it is a piece of shit society. Alright, so other than that, like, I guess I'll talk next about, well, let me mention Geordi, because I actually kind of like Geordi in this episode, because Geordi is offended by the society because he wouldn't exist in the society, and he talks about that a lot. He's like, oh, and everyone's making a big deal. Oh my God, you're actually blind? He's like, that's fine. I have no issue with being blind, and I wouldn't even exist if if I was on your planet, because the genetic engineering would eliminate me to begin with, and of course it's the visor that he uses is what helps save the colony, and I love how he was like laughing about that and thought, oh, this is so rich and this is what great irony. Aha, the hunter has become the hunted. No. That doesn't imply at all. I'm just throwing shit out. But anyway, so I thought that was cool. But yeah, Geordi definitely had that same reaction that I did when people wanted to leave. He's like, Troi or someone was like, no, we can't let them do it, and Geordi's like, we have to, and he's absolutely correct, that it would be immoral for them to stop those people from leaving, and if the society can't stand those people leaving, then that's the fucking society's fault. And you might be saying, well, Mark, that's a bit cruel, because there's people who will be left behind who will deal with the repercussions, although we don't know what the fuck those repercussions are going to be because the episode's too goddamn vague. But let's assume the repercussions are really terrible. You might, well, that's kind of cruel, Mark, to not give a shit about all the people who has to deal with the repercussions left behind. They can leave too. No one's forcing them to leave. And if they're pissed off, well, I don't want to leave, but those people who are leaving are making my society worse, then that is not the people who are leaving's fault. That's your goddamn society's fault. That's what you get from living in such a flawed society, so maybe you should leave it too. I'm not saying. And if you choose to stay, that's your decision, and you deal with the consequences of living in a shitty society. Piece of shit society. Anyway, so this is a plot, B plot. This is number 4 for season 5, so we've already surpassed season 4, which only had 3. I mentioned before that season 3 didn't have any, but then I thought about Deja Q, but I think when I did my revisitor for Deja Q, I classified that it doesn't count, but it did involve like some, moon falling bullshit that nobody cares about, but that wasn't really focused on, and I think it was integrated into the main plot enough where it wasn't a clear separation. And this episode could be considered along the same lines that the B plot of the stellar core fragment or whatever is integrated into the main plot, because it involves what the catalyst as to why this masterpiece or piece of shit society starts to fall apart. But the reason why I think I would classify it as the, boring ass B plot with some little bullshit anomaly that we don't give a shit about is because we have several scenes devoted to Geordi and that other scientist spouting out a bunch of technobabble bullshit. And that's boring. And at least in Deja Q, you had like Q there going, this is what we're going to be doing, and being a dick. And so that was there to liven up those scenes to make it not so boring, whereas these scenes are just technobabble. What if a technobabble this? Well, technobabble that. So no, this counts as a boring B-plot bullshit. Number 4 in season 5, so we'll keep going. See how many season 5 gets. Speaking of boring plots or subplots, let's talk about Deanna Troi. I think this is the main reason why I call this episode boring. Like, I always think of that scene when leader guy, I can't remember his name, doesn't matter, boring guy, I'll call him boring guy. Boring guy is on the planet with Troi, and they're hitting on each other, and they're listening to some kid play the piano, and I'm thinking, it's so boring. And here's the reason why this whole subplot is boring. Because I don't buy their romance. I don't buy it's a Meridian thing where they meet each other, they flirt a bit, and now they're like completely devoted, and I'm in love with you, I'm falling so deeply in love. And then they get all melodramatic afterwards in the morning after, when Deanna does the walk of shame. She's sitting there fucking around with the piano being like, I made a huge mistake, and they're both like super melodramatic about it, and I just could not give a shit. I think this again is bad writing. It does nothing to invest me in this subplot at all. I really honestly, I think this episode doesn't need the subplot. I think this episode would have been fine without it. In fact, I'll go even further than that. This episode would have been better without it. What I think they should have done is actually had a romance between Geordi and what's-her-face. I don't know any of these characters' names, but the scientist who is working with them. Because first of all, Geordi deserves a love interest that actually is interested in him, rather than him just being a fucking creep and a loser who's never able to score, which eventually they will correct this in the episode Aquiel, but I'll get there when I get there. But still, they should have done it here. First of all, and secondly, it would be more interesting because it would tie more directly into why she's choosing to leave. And I could see why maybe the reason why they avoided it is because they didn't want to imply the reason she wanted to leave was because of Geordi. But they could still make it clear that that wasn't the case. In fact, maybe someone could accuse her of that, and she would be like, that doesn't fucking matter. I just don't want to be in this planet anymore. I want to explore the galaxy. I still think that would make it more interesting. I think that would add an extra layer, because I actually found their relationship more interesting. I love how it's actually one of the more interesting relationship Geordi had with women. And again, he was not all weird and stupid around them. And I think he has more chemistry with her than Aquiel. Just saying. And so, and I think they worked well together. And it had an interesting dynamic, the fact that Geordi would kind of put down her society for, being anti-blind person or, being against disabilities when he, deserves just as much right to live as anything and as anyone. And how she turns around and she begins to actually, that sinks in, and part of the reason why she realizes that her society is a piece of shit. So we should have focused more on that storyline, though. And I think they had more, honestly, I think they had better chemistry than Troi and Boring Guy. God, and that stuff was just so damn boring. It was so boring. Anyway, so, and I love the scene in the turbolift where Deanna Troi tells Picard, she's like, hold the turbolift, and tells Picard, like, I did a very indiscretion. I did a very bad judgment. And Picard's like, before you say what you're going to say, just take a deep breath and say it. And so she's like, I've had a relationship with the leader guy, boring guy, and it was inappropriate and blah, blah. And Picard's like, I see. Okay, whatever. Turbolift resume. I don't know. Some people didn't interpret this scene that way, but I totally did. He seemed to be like, he was trying to be polite to her. He didn't want to like say to her face, why are you being so damn melodramatic about it? Whoop-de-doo. But it's because, yeah, he wasn't going to be that rude. He was trying to respect her feelings, and he was like, but he didn't seem to care. He just resumed the turbolift, and she kept talking about it, and I could only imagine Picard thinking, wow, you're still on this? But he says, to err is human. By the way, Picard, remember she's only half human. But anyway, so I guess only half of her errs. But anyway, he's like, we're only human, born to make mistakes. Anyway, it's what he basically says to her. So he does try to make her feel better. But I get the impression that he doesn't really care. And in fact, it doesn't really affect things going forward anyway, which is exactly what I mean by this subplot is complete waste of time, and we would have been way better off without it. Not to mention the fact that if Picard did hold this against her, he would be the biggest hypocrite in the world. And Troi herself is being completely unreasonable and holding herself to a higher standard than, say, Riker, who slept with the leader of Angel One, which is actually kind of worse because she was sort of an antagonist who was actively trying to kill the people that they were there to save, and yet nobody batted an eye about the fact that Riker slept with this world leader who is antagonistic to their goals, and that is way worse than what Troi did. And so why, maybe judging by Picard's reaction, there isn't a double standard because he doesn't give a shit about this. But if he did, there would be a massive double standard. And why is Troi holding herself to this double standard, saying, oh, I made a mistake? I think it speaks poorly to how women are treated, or the self-image that women are given in the 24th century, that they feel very subconscious about doing something that men can do with no repercussions whatsoever. I don't know. I think that kind of speaks poorly. Or maybe you could say it just speaks to that Troi has a better character who has more sort of self-standards than Riker, who just wants to fuck everything that moves and doesn't give a shit. The Riker's more of the bimbo. But I don't know. It's particularly because of how modern-day society is treated, particularly in the 90s, where the double standard exists, where it's seen as like heroic, and people are like, yeah, when a man sleeps with a bunch of women, he's a ladies' man, oh, he's a go-getter. But if when a woman sleeps with a bunch of men, she's a slut. That slut shaming, I think, is the term I'm looking for. And so this kind of reminds me of that, and so that's not a good look for the 24th century. But anywho, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else I really have to say about this boring-ass episode. I could talk about that guy who was like, oh, this colony is all the colony, and you should do what the founders were saying. The guy reminded me of a Republican, by the way, not to get too political again, but the founding fathers said this. But, of course, he would only be a true Republican analogy if what he was saying was actually nothing like what the founding fathers actually said, and if their founding fathers were slave owners, then that would be a better analogy. Yeah, but then again, their founding fathers created the piece of shit society that was all about eugenics, which what other group was into eugenics? the Nazis. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. Anyway, I wonder, they should have followed up on the society. I wonder what happened to what's-her-face. She just, of course, disappears, just like all the other characters who come on the ship. Marasta Yale, Barash, who else? I don't know. There's been other people who like come on board the ship and then disappear, never to be seen of again. Thus is the episodic nature of Next Generation, but thus is why I don't give a shit about this damn episode. Anyway, I would now like to thank all those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. I am very appreciative to everyone's support. I want to give a big special thanks to Brandon Nailhouse for all your support. Thank you so very, very much. But I also want to give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Manny Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Miglasio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I would be fecked in the Master Race Society as I have a lazy eye. I couldn't get laser eye surgery as my brain doesn't recognize my right eye, so I'm basically blind in the right eye. I don't use it much. Moving on, this is number 6 saying that Mark uses. Do I say moving on? I don't think you'll see, this is the only one that you brought up so far. Like the first 5 sayings that you say, I say a lot. I absolutely do. But moving on, I don't think I do say that. I don't know. Some other people maybe chime in the comments. Do I say moving on a lot? Anyway, moving on. Deanna Troi is good in this episode. If you forget about the romance part, Deanna tells Picard that she acted unprofessionally. Picard should have said this. You know I have to deal with this on a regular basis with Riker, right? Deanna Troi does the right thing here, not going back to the planet. Riker, however, didn't in the Outcast episode. One of these days, the Federation will go to war over Riker's womanizing, and this will be called Riker's Intergalactic Affair. Appropriate name. Geordi can talk to women, and I'm 100% convinced that Hannah Bates, that's her name, thank you, is the mother of Geordi's kids and when he returned to the Enterprise. He deletes the Leah Brahms hologram program and blocked her out of his life. So my rating is 5. I don't understand the hate Deanna Troi gets. As I said, in defense of Deanna Troi comment, I think people forget she's only half Betazoid, and worst 2 characters on both on TNG both have the same surname out of 10. Ooh, am I guessing a Crusher? Are you one of those Dr. Crusher haters? I don't understand the Dr. Crusher haters. I've watched this podcast where this guy like actively, like violently hates Beverly Crusher, and I don't understand that at all. Like, she's only a billion times better than Dr. Pulaski. Fuck Dr. Pulaski. Anyway, I say anyway a lot. I don't say moving on a lot. Anyway, actually, because All Good Things said that Leah Brahms was Geordi's wife, and I was like, yuck. But they never mentioned who was Geordi's wife in Picard Season 3. That would have been cool if it was Hannah Bates. In fact, if they said, oh, Hannah Bates was my wife, I would be like, who the fuck is that? And then I'd go online or some YouTube video would be like, this is that lady from Masterpiece Society. I'm like, oh, yeah. But they never actually had a thing. I think Aquiel should have been his wife. But anyway, or at least the mother of his kids. Maybe Hannah Bates would be better. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, the story about the core fragment is solved by technobabble and is clearly the least engaging part of this story. Is it though? Sorry. The question of whether a planned and safe life is more attractive or not sounds very interesting, but I missed a more in-depth exploration of this topic. I like Troi's relationship. To me, it feels more natural and well scripted than all the other relationships since Half Alive. My rating is a 6 out of 10. Yeah, I'm going to have to agree to disagree with you on the Troi's relationship with what's-his-face, boring guy, being the most interesting relationship since Half Alive, because it's not interesting at all. I think it's boring as hell, and if we're talking about a better relationship between here and there, Wesley and God, what's her face? Robin Leffler. Easily is like way better than this. Even though the game is a terrible episode and I think it sucks. The only good thing about that episode was Wesley and Robin Leffler, and they had like a billion times more chemistry than Deanna Troi. In fact, the Deanna Troi relationship in this episode is not only not the most interesting relationship since Half Alive, it is not even the most interesting relationship in this episode. The Geordi and Hannah Bates relationship is more interesting. But, just my humble opinion. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, if there is any episode that was trying so hard to tick many boxes for a Trek episode, this is certainly it, and it may be the number one reason why it ends up being mediocre. Mediocre! Eugenics, including a society construct, check. Prime directive dilemma, check. Needing to rescue a colony that doesn't want to deal with Starfleet, check. Pointing out shortcomings of society, especially how Geordi would have not been allowed to exist in that society, check. A Starfleet officer getting intimate with the leader of society, check. Whether interfering or not be harmful to the society, check. And at the time Masterpiece Society premiered, all these tropes had pretty much already existed in this series or TOS. It was too much of a standard Trek script that there didn't seem to be much of a breath of fresh air in this one. And as I pointed out in my criticism of Angel 1, Troi does the exact thing Riker did, but while there's no self-reflection from Riker himself, let alone scolding for interfering as he did, i.e. Angel 1, I'm sure was the only one of ones in Admiral Satie's list. Troi feels she had to apologize, and when she does to Picard, he agrees. Where was the talk when the male senior officer did the same thing? So the question is, now, do I make it easily a 5 or ding it because of the lack of originality, and that one time we have regrets, it comes from the female officer first? Yes, I will ding it, so I will give it 3. There really isn't anything that special of the gifted genetic pianist out of 10. I don't know if Picard agreed with Troi. I think he was humoring her because he could see how much this bothered her, and he didn't want to be rude. But I really don't think he gave a shit. Which, to be fair, is the correct response if we want to be fair with Riker. Anyway, final comment is from Ricky, who says, this episode is actually boring. No, sorry, this episode is extremely boring. I don't like it, and it always puts me to sleep, and this is what I think of Season 5. Mostly boring and full episodes, and especially hated the Troi relationship with this guy, and that scene where she tells Picard that she slept with him was a laugh out loud bad. You could tell that he couldn't really care less about that, and he should have said, so what? Anyway, 2 out of 10 is my rating. Yeah, as always, Ricky and I are pretty much on the same page. Yeah, I don't know if I would say that scene was bad. I would just say that Troi seemed to be unnecessarily harsh on herself, and I talked about the societal implications of that don't really is not a good look for this episode. It also makes me think of that Voyager episode, The Disease, which I'll get to when all of a sudden someone has a problem with an officer sleeping with an alien when it's Harry Kim, yet fucking Kirk and Riker and even Janeway herself does this a lot, and yet they pick on poor Harry Kim. God, Harry Kim really got picked on. It's bullshit. But anyway, I'll get to that when I get to that. So thank you very much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Piece of Shit Society, the Masterpiece Society, out of 10 is a 2, extremely poor. In fact, I was thinking about giving this episode a 1, but there's nothing about it that is absolutely terrible. It's close, but I like the Geordi stuff with Hannah Bates, but the moral dilemma is not even interesting because they don't really define the society. Like, why the fuck should we care? What are these repercussions that are going to happen? And why the fuck should we care about some genetically engineered asshole society not being perfect anymore? Oh no, you're not perfect. So now you're just like every other fucking human in the universe. Why should we care? And as I said, if their society can't stand 23 people leaving, then their society does not deserve to exist. Period. Point blank. Tough love. Maybe people say I'm being too harsh, but it's true when it's true. And on top of that, God, this episode's boring. I couldn't give a shit about the stellar core fragment and all the whatever the fuck it is, and all the technobabble nonsense. We got to technobabble this, technobabble to technobabble that, technobabble, and then when we're not technobabbling the technobabble, we're dealing with Troi having a boring ass relationship, watching some little kid play the piano. God damn it! I just want to sleep through this whole fucking thing. So, yeah, I think I'm being generous by not giving this episode a 1. But anyway, that is it for my review of Piece of Shit Society. So, let's see what's coming up next on my channel. Wednesday, I'll be over on Patreon to do a this time revisiting my review for Conundrum for my Patreon supporters, and on Thursday back here with a new public review for Power Play, and then Saturday sticking here with another new review for Ethics. I wanted to include Ethics in the stretch of boring, but Conundrum and Power Play are in the damn way. Get out of the way. Anyway, and then on Sunday night or Monday morning will be my review for the 3rd episode of Season 2 of House of the Dragon. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out for that and many more Star Trek reviews and many other videos and plenty of other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.